Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kaylee and these are my books. So for today's video, I have my July wrap-up. I already did a mid-month July wrap-up, so this wrap-up is going to be the last 2 weeks of July. However, I do still have 22 books to talk about in this wrap-up, even though it's only the last 2 weeks. I don't know how that happened. I think I just was really inspired by Summerween, and then I ended up reading a lot of graphic novels, so obviously I could get through those pretty quickly. However, because a lot of these books I do talk about in my Summerween vlogs, when I get to a Summerween book, I'm just gonna say what it is and say my rating and move on. And if you want a more extensive review, you can go ahead and check out my Summerween vlogs, which will be linked down below. Without further ado, let's jump into the books. I'm going to start with my lowest rated books and then work my way up to the 5 stars to kind of give you some anticipation of what the best books I've read this month are. Now, starting with 2 stars, because I didn't have any 1 stars for these last 2 weeks of July, but I did have some 2 stars. The first 2 star I had was Lovely Bad Things by Trisha Wolfe. This is a dark romance following a criminal profiler and a serial killer falling in love. I do talk about this in my Summerween wrap-up, however, so I'm just gonna let you know I gave it 2 stars, didn't super enjoy it. The next 2-star book I had was Fangs. This is a graphic novel following a love story between a vampire and a werewolf. However, it just didn't work for me. I didn't connect to the characters. It's really not a graphic novel. It's more like a series of very short comic strips, like a panel of like 3 comic strips makes up that scene, and then you move on to the next scene. But each scene isn't really connected. So I don't know, it was hard for me to connect to the characters. It was very reliant on puns. Like most of the humor in this graphic novel was puns, and I just didn't find it funny. And I think it's supposed to be quite funny. That's where most of the charm comes from, but I was dead-faced the entire time reading this book. So I didn't really enjoy it. I see why a lot of other people think it's super cute and love it, but for me, this was 2 stars. I was like, meh. And then I did give this next book 2 stars, but it was a DNF, so take my 2-star rating with a grain of salt. This was Nosferatu by Joe Hill. This was also a Summerween read, so if you want more information about why I DNF'd and why I gave it 2 stars, check out that vlog. Moving on to my 3-star reads, the first of which is Fantastic Land. I listened to this on audiobook, so I think if I didn't listen to it on audiobook, I wouldn't have liked it as much, because this is a fake documentary story about this disaster happening in an amusement park, and basically everyone goes Lord of the Flies and there's murder. All these teens are just going crazy in this amusement park, and the audiobook is like a documentary where it's interviewing people that experience what happened in this amusement park after the fact. This was a Summerween read, so I won't talk too much more about it. I promise I'm moving on to non-Summerween books where I'll give you more details, but this was a 3-star book, 2 stars for the actual story, bumped up a star just because the audiobook was so fantastic. My next 3-star read was This Woven Kingdom. This is a YA fantasy story, and I loved this story in the first maybe 30% of it. In This Woven Kingdom, we're following the heir to this Jinn kingdom, and it's really complicated because the world hates Jinn and they're very scared of Jinn, all the humans, because Jinn are magical and powerful, and due to past politics and past wars, humans and Jinns are not friends. However, this girl is the heir to the Jinn kingdom, and she's in hiding because a lot of people want to kill her because of her status. And then we have the crown prince of the human world, and he begins to suspect that this maidservant is a spy. And of course she isn't a spy, she actually is just in hiding. But they interact, they begin to fall in love, there's some politics. It's very, very good in the first 30%. However, the last 70%, in my opinion, it became so insta-love, like the tension wore off too quickly, and then they were just like, yeah, we love each other. And I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that they would fall for each other that quickly. And the politics were what I was most interested in, and I feel like they took a back seat in the last 70%. And I feel like our main female protagonist was not as active as I wanted her to be. It was a lot of things happening to her instead of her actively going out and doing things. I am not sure if I will continue on in the series or not, we'll have to see, but if anything I said intrigues you, I say give it a try, because I've kind of been falling out of love with YA fantasy, So the fact that I gave this 3 stars, it actually means it's a very good book, just not for me specifically. The next book in my 3-star category is actually a secret 2.5 stars, but I am rounding it up to 3, and it is Never Die by Rob Hayes. So this is a self-published fantasy book that I read for the Summer of Self-Pub readathon that Rachel put on. She's kind of part of the late night crew, and it was just inspiring everyone to kind of pick up more self-published books, especially self-published fantasy. So I picked up Never Die. And Never Die is about this 8-year-old boy who is told by a god he needs to go and kill this immortal emperor. So he's just going on a journey, collecting heroes along the way, forming a team to go and challenge the emperor. However, this book just didn't work for me. It was so action-packed, and normally you'd be like, action-packed? That sounds amazing. Sign me up. But do not sign me up. It was too action-packed where I feel like there were no character moments, and I had no opinion on whether or not I cared about each of the characters. Anyone could have died at any point, and I would have been like, okay. It was just pure action, and after a while, pure action gets boring to read about. I found myself skimming, but you can't skim the whole book because the whole book is just action. And it was quite repetitive because it followed the structure of we're walking, we meet a hero, oh, let's challenge the hero. We challenge the hero is added to our party, and we're walking. Oh, we meet a new hero. And so it was just like battle scene, walking scene, battle scene, walking scene. And I will say the end of the book was quite good. I really liked what happened at the very end of the book, which is what bumped it up from a 2-star to a 2.5/3 star. But this book for me just didn't work. And this is a very short book, and it still took me a while to read just because the action was such a drag to get through. However, if you love action in your books and you want a book with a ton of action, I highly recommend this book because the action scenes were very cool. It's just there were too many of them for me. The next 3-star book I have is the Graceling graphic novel. I read Graceling a long time ago, like maybe in high school I read it. Back when like booktube was obsessed with Graceling was when I read Graceling, and I loved it back then. I'm afraid to reread it though because I don't think I would love it anymore, but I did read the graphic novel. And the graphic novel was a lot of fun. Solid 3-star read. I had fun with it. It's hard for me to give a graphic novel a higher rating than like a 3-star just because graphic novels are so fast that it takes a lot for a graphic novel to really like give me an emotional connection to it. But I had fun with this. If you're wanting a reread of Graceling but you don't want to actually commit to rereading Graceling, highly recommend the graphic novel. And the last 3-star book I had was another graphic novel. It was Sas and Sorcery, Volume 1 of the Rat Queens comics. And this was so much fun. The reason why I got a 3-star is just because I feel like I didn't know the characters very well still at the end of this volume. However, I am still interested to pick up more volumes of Rat Queens. Now, this is a graphic novel that almost reads like a D&D campaign. So we have the mage, we have the dwarf, we have the warrior, and they all get together and they go on quests. And they're literally called, like, they say they're going on quests to clear out a goblin cave and get the coins to improve their armor. It's like a D&D campaign. And it was a lot of fun. However, I feel like it was a bit surface level in this first volume. I'm sure the future volumes will go deeper into the characters, but for this first volume, it was just sitting at a 3-star. Now moving on to my 3.5-star reads. So the first one is another graphic novel. I did warn you, I read a lot of graphic novels this month. Another graphic novel called Through the Woods. This is a very interesting graphic novel because it is a graphic novel horror anthology book. So it's a graphic novel comprised of short horror stories. This is very hard to do in a graphic novel form, in my opinion, because already graphic novels don't have a ton of space for words and content. You know, it's mostly images that are doing the storytelling. So then when you limit that down to only like 20 pages per story, how can you get across a well-developed story? And somehow Through the Woods still impressed me. Now, this is a 3.5-star book because some of the stories in this anthology just didn't work for me. I don't know, I felt like I didn't understand the story, like it was too abstract or just didn't hit, like maybe I was trying to look too deep into it, but there wasn't anything deeper. But I will say I loved the last story. The last story is called The Nesting Place, and that is a 5 out of 5 star story. So if you ever get your hands on Through the Woods, this graphic novel, go and read The Nesting Place because it was so good. And that's what bumped it up to a 3.5 star, because honestly the rest of the stories were just like cool to read, but The Nesting Place, like I was like, yes, The Nesting Place is so good. So Through the Woods, The Nesting Place, 5 out of 5, but Through the Woods as in its entirety, 3.5 stars. Another 3.5 star book was Lightblade. This is another self-published fantasy book that I read for that readathon. And this fantasy book is the most unique fantasy book I have ever read. So this fantasy is kind of like sci-fi meets fantasy meets Inception meets The Matrix. And there was such cool magic concepts going on. There was dream magic, there was light magic, there was like weird sci-fi horror elements. It was very cool. And during the first 200 pages, this is like a 520 page book. So during the first 200 pages, I thought this book was going to get 5 stars. I was so into it. I was talking to a bunch of people about this book, saying how freaking cool it was. And then it took a turn and we shifted focus, and I wasn't as interested in where we shifted our focus to for the last 300 pages. So overall, this is a 3.5 star book. I feel like I was still left with some questions that I wanted answered, and the concept was very cool, but I wanted us to dig deeper into that concept. And I know there will be future books in this series, so I'm sure we'll dig deeper in the future books, but this book being over 500 pages, I wanted it to do more than it did with those 500 pages. However, even though this is a 3.5 star book, I still recommend you to read it if you're an epic fantasy lover, just because of how unique it was. It was such a joy to open up this book and literally have no clue where this book was going. It felt brand new. All right, now moving on to 4 stars. I had a lot of 4 stars in these last 2 weeks, so this is my biggest category. And we are starting with some Summerween books again. So Cirque Berserk, I gave this book 4 stars, loved it. But, you know, if you want to find out more, check out my vlog. The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, again, 4 stars, really enjoyed it, check out the vlog. Cackle by Rachel Harrison, 4 stars, super fun contemporary / horror, check out the vlog. And my last check out the vlog comment is for Camp Neverland. This was another 4 star book, part of the same series that Cirque Berserk is part of, which is the Rewind or Die series, all on Kindle Unlimited. They're like horror novellas, highly recommend the ones I've read at least. There's 33 books. I've only read Cirque Berserk and Camp Neverland, but I really enjoyed both of those. And from what I can tell, I think most of the books in this 33 book long series kind of follow that same vibe. So if you like one, I'm hoping we like all of them. They don't progress off of each other, so you can read them in any order. Now for a 4 star that wasn't featured in a Summerween vlog, The Swordsman Lament. This is a self-published fantasy book, and this was my favorite self-published fantasy that I read that week for the readathon. This self-published fantasy, The Swordsman Lament, was so cozy. It was so cozy. It was the kind of book I wanted to curl up next to a fireplace and just read, even though I was reading it in July. I wanted it to be like raining out with a fire on and a cozy blanket, candles with the flames flickering, you know, just reading it. Unfortunately, I was reading it on my phone, so that's like the least cozy way to read something, but it was so familiar, but still unique. So let me explain what I mean by that. When I say familiar, I mean we have a lot of very familiar fantasy tropes in here. We have the legendary swordsman, we have the king, we have the prince that's a bit of a rebel, we have the daughter that's dutifully devoted to her king and also the swordsman. We have these peasants that are looking up to their king, looking up to the swordsman and getting promoted. It's just all of the cozy fantasy feels, right? But I don't mean the story itself is cozy, because we're dealing with a murder and we're dealing with an assassin, we're dealing with poison, but it just, I don't know, it's so cozy. And by it feeling unique still, I mean this is a mashup of a murder mystery and a fantasy. And I don't see a ton of murder mysteries happening within fantasy stories, at least where the murder mystery is the forefront of the plot. And that is the forefront of the plot. We're trying to figure out who killed the person that died in this book. And it just worked for me. I was almost tempted to give this 5 stars. I know I'm gushing about it. The reason why I didn't give it 5 stars is I did find the writing at some points to be a bit jarring. I don't know, there were some flashback scenes, and when we transitioned between the two, I sometimes pulled me out of the story because the transitions felt very abrupt. But you know, that's just me being picky. I am definitely going to pick up the other books in this series. There's a prequel and a sequel. I am very excited to continue on with these characters, and I highly recommend this book. The next 4-star book I have is actually the graphic novel version of Stormfront by Jim Butcher, which is the Harry Dresden Files. This was volume 1, so it didn't cover the whole book of Stormfront. It just covered like maybe the first 30%-ish. I loved this. I love the Harry Dresden Files. I think I'm on like book 6 or 7 in that series, and I've loved all of them. They're such like fun stories to read about. Another genre mashup of the detective story paired with a fantasy story. And this graphic novel I felt was a great adaptation. The reason why I got 4 stars instead of 5 stars, you know, I feel like in the book we're getting so much more character development. In the graphic novel, the characters are all quite a bit more flat, purely because of the format. You know, it's hard to put all that characterization just in a short graphic novel. But where it lacked in the character development that the book had, it benefited from these incredible visuals. The art was stunning. So if you're a Harry Dresden fan and you've already read Stormfront, I recommend picking up this graphic novel. If you have not read Stormfront yet, I recommend reading the novel before picking up the comics. My next 4-star reads are 2 more graphic novels. Actually, these are my last graphic novels I am going to talk about in this video, and it's Monstrous volumes 2 and 3. So I read both of these volumes this month. I read Monstrous volume 1 a couple of months ago. I love Monstrous. It's so good. This is my favorite graphic novel series ever that I've ever read. It's just, the art is stunning. It's a dark fantasy that plays with some horror tropes within it. There's tons of lore. There's tons of character development. There's lovable characters. There's hateable characters. There's crazy plot moments. It has it all. Now, the one thing I will say about Monstrous, sometimes I do feel a little bit confused about the politics situation or the different nations or the different behind the scenes going ons at these like political meetings. They're a little bit hard for me to fully comprehend. Just, I think because of the graphic novel format, it's a bit difficult to like give off tons of information without it being confusing. So sometimes I'm just reading and, you know, following along, going with the vibe, being like, do I know what's happening? Not really, but do I still love it? Yes. And I promise that doesn't happen all the time. It's just every so often I'm like, wait, who are these people? I'm not sure. And I'm a big fantasy reader, so I don't think it's just me, but maybe it's just me. But anyways, the art in these volumes are stunning. It's my favorite art in any graphic novel that I've ever seen, and the story is just so good. So if you're gonna pick up any graphic novel from this video, pick up Monstrous. And then my last 4-star read that is not a graphic novel is Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. I loved this book. I love Grady Hendrix. I'm a Grady Hendrix stan. I'm a fangirl. I love all his stuff. So Horror Store, being a 4 stars, probably actually makes it my lowest rated book from him. I obviously still loved it if I gave it 4 stars. My one criticism is, you know, I feel like we go from 0 to 100 like super fast when the switch happens. I'm not saying the switch happens early on in the book. It kind of does, but it's like around page 100. But when it does happen, I feel like there's no build up to it happening. It's just like nothing and then everything happens. So if I could like tweak it to be my exact liking, I would have a bit more build up in there just so we could see, you know, more of the tension played out. However, that's just me being picky. You know, I really, really enjoyed this book. So what is Horror Store about? It's like kind of about this IKEA knockoff store, and it's haunted, and some employees have to stay there overnight to try to check what's happening, because every time they come back into the store in the morning, there's some graffiti, there's some like gross things happening on the couches. And so there's a team that stays there overnight to basically check out what is going on in the store when no one's here. And shenanigans ensue. Now moving on to my 5 stars. I only have 2 5 stars for this video. And one of these 5 stars is quite controversial. So I'll start with the 5 star that is not controversial. And that is The Carrow Hunt by Darcy Coates. I love Darcy Coates. I think she is an amazing atmospheric horror writer, cozy horror writer. And The Carrow Hunt is a lot of people's favorite Darcy Coates book, and I can see why. It has it all. I mean, this is a book about a paranormal investigative team checking out this haunted mansion where a serial killer killed a bunch of people when it was a hotel. Now, I did talk about this in my Summerween vlog, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but The Carrow Hunt, chef's kiss. And now for the last book I'm going to talk about, and also the most controversial book I'm going to talk about. And I'm a little bit afraid that when you hear me say what book I gave 5 stars, you're going to be like, I can't trust her anymore. But I gave 5 stars to The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. Okay, let me explain myself. It was fun. That's not a good explanation. It was so fun though. Okay, I see why people dislike this book. It starts kind of one genre and ends a different genre. The twist in the middle is quite a twist that's way out there, right? So if you're looking for a realistic thriller, this is not the book for you. However, in my opinion, the twist turned it more into a horror book, and I love horror books. So it worked for me. And I have heard other people say that, you know, while they didn't mind the twist, they found it just a little bit boring, which, sure, I didn't find it boring at all. I was 0% bored throughout the entire thing, so I can't really speak on that. I found it incredibly entertaining. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. The twist was so fun, and I haven't seen a book kind of play with genres like that. I love when a book plays with the genre. So obviously saying The House Across the Lake, this is a book that he wrote knowing all the tropes coming with that. I mean, we got that Netflix movie of like the woman in the window watching the house across the way or whatever it was called, because it's such a trope in domestic thrillers. And I just loved how he played with my expectations for this book and totally switched them up and was like, you thought this was one thing, but really I'm writing this other book over here. So I enjoyed the surprise, and I was surprised by this twist. It's hard to surprise me by twists, and I loved that I was surprised. I felt like even though I was surprised, it was still set up throughout the book, and that it didn't come out of nowhere. It was still set up throughout the lore that the book provided. I don't know, I loved this book, and I think if you're putting off reading this book because of all the bad reviews, give it a try. Go in with an open mind. If you like crazy twists, try out this book because it definitely has a crazy twist. So I spoke about all the books that I read in these last 2 weeks, but because I also have a whole bunch of other books that I've read in July that aren't in this video in a different wrap-up video, I wanted to kind of show my stats for the month. That way it all comes together in this end of July wrap-up. So in July, I read 35 books, which is a lot for me, but you have to remember a lot of those were graphic novels. So 35 books in July, and the moods that I mostly read were dark, adventurous, and mysterious, which I think those are my moods every single month. I love a dark book. I mostly read fantasy this month, with my secondary genres being horror, romance, and thriller. Again, not surprising, those are probably going to be my genres every month, just depending on the month which one is the highest that I read. Some months I'll mostly read romance, some months I'll mostly read horror. This month I mostly read fantasy. I read 10,789 pages this month, which is a good amount. It's obviously a lot, but for me, I think it's average. I don't know, we'll have to see as I continue doing these stats how it shifts. But for this month, it was about 10,000 pages. And my average rating for this month was a 3.4, which is low for me. That is quite low. And I think the reason why it's low, honestly, is just starting this booktube channel and trying to get a little bit more critical in my reviews. I used to be someone that just threw out 5 stars, but I'm trying to actually think like, was that a 5-star book? Or is that just a gut reaction right when I finished it because I had a good time, but really it's maybe like a 4-star book. So I think with the channel, me getting more critical, 3.4 star being low for me, but it makes sense because this was also the first month I started my channel. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you read in July and what your favorite books were in July. And if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!